August 1st, 1955, Joseph Whaley, a 20-year-old man employed by the Georgia Forestry Commission, is clearing brush in Terrell County. It is laborious work, made all the more difficult by the thick morning dew which, thanks to the stifling Georgia humidity, stubbornly clings to the underbrush long into the early afternoon. It is also dangerous work. The area, a stretch of Brownwood-Smithville Highway along Kinchafoonee Creek, enjoys a notorious reputation for alligator sightings. Whaley is on high alert, aware that any misstep might reveal a hungry predator, patiently anticipating its next snag. But on this day, however, Whaley wouldn't have to worry about gators. What awaited him was far, far worse. You see, Whaley is just one of many state forestry employees who have found their occupation leading them into the unknown. He's not alone. Rangers, groundskeepers, and other park workers from all 50 U.S. states often find themselves tackling problems never listed in their job descriptions, from ghosts to UFOs and cryptids and strange disappearances. Now, for these employees, what began as just another day at work was destined to suddenly take turn for the strange. Did any of them sense somewhere in the back of their minds that this day would be different? Probably not. Or did they simply prepare for another day at work like the rest of us do? Were they constantly on guard against strange things, or did they simply dismiss the stories reported by park visitors and their superstitious coworkers as imaginations run amok? Georgia seems particularly well suited for encountering the impossible, its boundaries encompassing a diverse topography of shorelines, swamps, pine-covered plains, and imposing mountain chains. Like any land that has seen its share of conflict, ghosts cling to the old battlefields stringing the state north to south, east to west. The North Georgia peaks have held legends of the Nunahi, the Cherokee Little People, for longer than anybody can remember. Cypress trees delineating a maze of murky canals conceal the uncanny specter of a water monster with the tongue-in-cheek name of Altamaha, named after the Altamaha River in which it sometimes appears. There even exist curious one-off cryptids found nowhere else. Early settlers to the Winder area feared the wog, a jet-black pig-canine hybrid the size of a pony, while modern citizens of the same town today sometimes report pterosaurs thriving in the skies after their cousins, the dinosaurs, vanished from the face of the earth long ago. Alongside these historical horrors lurk more deadly, documentable monsters like feral hogs, some of which can reach unprecedented size. One shot and killed in 2004, for example, dubbed Hogzilla, measured nearly 9 feet long and weighed at least 800 pounds. Many thought it was a hoax until the National Geographic Channel exhumed its remains and confirmed these monstrous dimensions. If residents are to be believed, even larger specimens scour the sandy plains, thriving in the state's warm climate as they obliterate the local ecosystem. Above all, Georgia is a reliable Bigfoot hotspot, with sightings of the creature reported extensively throughout the state, even into the parts of modern-day metro Atlanta area. Visitors to the city today would be astonished to learn that these areas, once the haunt of hairy man-beasts, have slowly been absorbed into the inevitable urban expansion, with shopping malls and crosswalks erected over pathways once choked by briar patches. In short, despite being the 8th most populous state in the U.S., Georgia holds many mysteries it is yet to reveal. There have always been tales of strange things throughout the state, whispered warnings from old-timers whose wisdom has been handed down through the generations. Only few take them seriously, and those who don't, like Joseph Whaley, pay the price. Like so many other forestry employees, Whaley was aware of odd reports in the area, but paid them little mind. You see, the weeks prior, he had seen upticks of stories regarding a silvery white, hairy ghost prowling the outskirts of Edison, a town in the neighboring county, around 35 miles to the southwest. Residents had reported the specter haunting the town late at night, terrorizing citizens before fleeing away with gigantic bounds. In at least one example, the figure had leapt over a 6-foot fence, leaving behind a strange single white hair. The witness, a Wayne Dozier, collected the sample and sent it to the state crime laboratory in Atlanta, hoping to find out more about its owner. Now, after examining the hair, forensic analysis determined that it had come from an ordinary human. But this revelation did little to calm the residents of Edison, who continued to report encounters with the creature. All this being said, Whaley had more pressing concerns on his mind. Not only was he worried about alligators, but South Georgia heat would have been oppressive, to say nothing of the swarm of insects which would have clouded his vision as he swept his scythe back and forth across the weeds. It was one of the few tools capable of clearing such heavy growth, and would prove indispensable in the coming moments. Whaley was snapped from the hypnotic lull of his work by a strange noise coming down the creek. The bushes seemed to be rattling. It wasn't a gator. It was too big. Maybe one of the state's many feral hogs, which often proved dangerous enough in their own right. Whaley lowered his sling blade and crept toward the sound for a closer look. He wished he hadn't. What came charging out of the thicket was immense, at least the size of a 6-foot-tall man. Its thick arms and small hands, like the rest of its body, displayed a thick coat of gray, shaggy fur as they reached out to snatch him. Whaley would later say that the beast reminded him of a gorilla, but added the curious detail that its head sported pointed ears and a pair of tusks. Armed only with his scythe, facing imminent attack, Whaley lashed out, hoping to keep this beast at bay, and the first time his blade only met air, swishing just inches from this thing's body. It pressed forward, another swing connected to the animal, hitting its hand, followed by another, which then cut a gash across its arm and chest. But yet, for all of his success, Whaley knew when to quit. His attacker unleashed a chest-rattling roar before continuing to trudge towards him. Whaley's only hope lay back the Jeep, where he could perhaps radio for some assistance. Stumbling towards his vehicle, Whaley threw open the door, snatched his radio, and explained his predicament as quickly as possible. One eye on the monster crashing towards him. No answer. His heart sank as his last only-ditch effort, he climbs into the Jeep and tries to start the engine. But by this point, his attacker was already upon him, and a hairy claw shot through the open window and seized Whaley, ripping his shirt and leaving behind a trio of scratches all over his left shoulder. With an animalistic sense of self-preservation, Whaley somehow managed to pull away, clambered across the front seat, falling out through the passenger side door of the Jeep before scrambling on his own 2 feet. Only a few feet now separated him from this monster, but it was enough. Whaley, fortunately, was able to take off into the forest, the limbs, branches, and thorns scraping his face and hands, but did little to discourage his escape. And only now and then did he even spare one moment to glance behind him. But slowly, his attacker began to fade out of sight, and once he felt sufficiently safe, Whaley decided to return to his Jeep, but had no desire to return in the direction he had come. Instead, he made a wide circle back through the forest, eventually finding his way back to the road. His Jeep sat in the distance, passenger side door still ajar. Whaley ran to the vehicle, which started without incident, and raced to the nearest ranger station. Once there, Whaley's supervisor, Forest Ranger Jim Bowen, attended to Whaley's wounds and listened to his tale with a skeptical yet open mind. Bowen returned to the site of the attack and, much to his surprise, could clearly make out signs of a visible struggle. His studied ranger's eye discerned a trail where something very visibly large had emerged from the bushes, exactly as Whaley had described. Now, in the coming days, others would add credibility to Whaley's story in the form of additional discoveries, like small handprints. It was an odd detail, yeah. Certainly not what we would expect from a Bigfoot encounter, if that's what this was, but nonetheless consistent with Whaley's observations. Now, Whaley would later repeat his story and swear to its authenticity under oath, putting his reputation and his career with the Forest Service at risk. The event garnered extensive media coverage, bringing with it the usual skeptical dismissals. In particular, Terrell County Sheriff Zeke Matthews had little patience for the story, going so far as to claim that he would have mounted a full-scale search for the beast if he felt there was any truth to it. Instead, his investigation was concluded by the time night fell on August 1st. Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents determined Whaley had encountered a farmer wearing a Halloween costume, perhaps trying to frighten away trespassers who sought his prized hidden fishing hole along the Kinshafuni Creek. The only GBI official sympathetic to Whaley was Major Delmar Jones, who, while expressing a genuine desire to get to the bottom of the whole affair, nonetheless concluded Whaley had run afoul of what he called, in his folksy southern way, a hog bear, a small, cantankerous black bear. With the blessing of nearly 7 decades of hindsight, these dismissals seem unfair to Whaley, whose wounds and circumstantial evidence at the site suggest he fought for his life that same day in 1955. Georgia has seen its share of fighting, long before the Civil and Revolutionary Wars quenched its soil with the blood of untold thousands. Indigenous inhabitants, like the Cherokee and Muskogee, engaged in their own conflicts, the remnants of which can still be felt today. National and state parks spring up around such sites with regularity. A fine example of this is Vogel State Park, which encompasses Blood Mountain, a site of a horrendous clash between these two tribes, a battle from which the peak possibly derives its name. Even before the battle, however, Blood Mountain was a hallowed place, serving as one of the primary homes of the Nunehee, the Cherokee Little People. While often friendly, the Nunehee, like fairy beings worldwide, could be dangerous if offended. And to this day, both visitors to Vogel State Park and its own park rangers describe a host of anomalies: strange mists, uncanny voices and cries, even sightings of the little people themselves. Blood Mountain seems to yet thirst for death, as evidenced by murder of Meredith Emerson on New Year's Day 2008. Her case was finally closed with the 2011 conviction of Gary Michael Hilton, a supposed serial killer responsible for several other deaths all throughout the Southeast. Though Emerson clearly met her fate at Hilton's hands, one wonders if something older, something even darker, may have also played a role. Features we ascribe to modern-day demons were once attributed to fairies the world over, including possession. Could Hilton have been possessed or at least motivated by sinister forces found around Blood Mountain? Fairies were also blamed for mysterious disappearances, often leading unwary travelers astray, and their New World counterparts, the Little People, were no exception. With this in mind, why did Mike Goodell, a 33-year-old former park ranger and corrections officer from New York State, disappear in 1996 into southeast Georgia's Okefenokee swamp, only to emerge safely nearly 6 weeks later? Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge manager Jim Burkhart was puzzled by the entire scenario, noting that only a few could have emerged from 40 days in the swamp safely, to say nothing of being entirely lucid on their return. Moreover, Goodell's disappearance coincided with the coldest weather in southeast Georgia in well over a decade. Yet, aside from having lost 50 pounds and some wounds on his feet, Goodell seemed no the worse for wear. Goodell claimed to have spent the entirety of his time subsisting off insects, leaves, and berries and swamp water on Billy's Island, a landmark only 4 miles wide and 2 miles long. Rangers insisted they had scoured every inch of Billy's Island, and they'd even brought out dogs, helicopters with infrared cameras, and up to 80 searchers, but somehow Goodell remained hidden from sight. In fact, Charlton County Sheriff Dobie Connor said this: "We had some of the best woodsmen, best tracking people on the ground, and the best tracking equipment in the air searching for him. I think it would have been almost impossible to have gotten by that." While there are dense pockets of brush on Billy's Island, The manner in which the lost man eluded search and rescue operatives is still a mystery. Was he abducted by the little people? Did he slip into an alternate reality, as so many in disappearing national parks do, only to emerge, unlike most, alive and healthy? For his part, Goodell has never come forward to report anything unusual during his stay on Billy's Island, other than simply being lost. Some, however, suspect Goodell may have been the victim of an alien abduction, his memory erased by his captors. Like the battle on Blood Mountain, other, more recent conflicts not yet lost to the mists of time are also enshrined in Georgia's park system. Some of these locations combine indigenous mythology with ghosts of the Civil War for some of the most unique hauntings in the Southeast. Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park enjoyed a terrifying reputation long before Civil War ghosts ever called the site their home. See, the park protects several mounds associated with the South Appalachian Mississippian culture, including a Great Temple Mound, a burial mound, ceremonial tumuli, and defensive trenches, all nestled along Macon's Ocmulgee River. As with similar archaeological sites throughout the United States, the Ocmulgee Mounds have always drawn in a variety of strange phenomena, from phantoms to ghost lights and more. For this, they command respect. Both the Creek and visiting Chickasaw people avoided them at night, when ghost warriors could be heard dancing among the mounds. As far back as the late 1700s, white settlers passing Ocmulgee and those brave enough to pitch their tents reported hideous wails cutting through the darkness. This was long before the American Civil War brought conflict to the mounds, and during the Battle of Dunlap Farm, Union and Confederate forces alike clashed in the area, leaving behind specters of the dead of who linger through the modern era. Today, visitors to Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park feel unseen presences lurking about, tugging on their hair or clothing, or even speaking to them. When they look to see who is responsible, no one is ever around. Other tourists see figures clad in Confederate gray wandering the property, and in a scenario repeated across all Civil War battlefields time and time again, report their sightings to park rangers who inevitably assure them there are no reenactors on site that day. Such sightings are not relegated to visitors, as park employees at Ocmulgee have come forward to share their own unexplained sightings as well. Sylvia Flowers, a ranger at the park, claimed that both tourist and park personnel had seen white and black dogs on the property all throughout the years, but their owners never stepped forward. In some instances, the animals seemed to just vanish before the witnesses' very eyes. This has led to more speculation that the dog is actually the phantom pet of the family who once ran the Dunlap farm, where the battle took place. Supposedly, Samuel Dunlap owned a white dog himself, and the animal persisted in the park long after its death. At the same time, others have unearthed a Creek legend claiming large black canines appear as guardian spirits around archaeological sites, like Ocmulgee, protecting the sacred locations from anyone who might seek to damage them. Sam Lawson, adjunct professor at Georgia Military College and former park ranger at Ocmulgee, was closing up the visitor center one night when he had a peculiar experience. At first, it was no different than 100 other evenings. He had completed his final check of the building and was turning his key to lock the doors when he heard what sounded like the giggle of a child. Lawson was alarmed, convinced he had locked someone inside the visitor center, and knew he couldn't just walk away and stand with a child there. With a sigh, he reopened the doors and thoroughly searched every inch of the building, but nobody could be found. Lawson then managed to enlist a coworker, but their joint search also failed to turn up anything. It wasn't until later that Lawson, who would share his experience with the manager of the gift shop, who told him she also had heard the laugh on several different occasions. Almost 2 hours to the west, similar activity plagues workers at the 9,049-acre Franklin D. Roosevelt State Park, named after the United States president who sought relief for his paralysis in the warm springs of neighboring Bullockville. Prior to his election in 1932, Roosevelt actually built a residence nearby, the Little White House, to take full advantage of the spring's therapeutic properties. FDR State Park features several amenities built during the Great Depression by Civilian Conservation Corps members, including a former stone tavern and hotel converted into the park's primary gift shop and registration center. From its perch atop Pine Mountain, visitors can take in an expansive view of the surrounding area, all in the shadow of a haunted house. Employees have long since reconciled themselves to the fact that they share office space with something from beyond the grave. Workers will safely search the premise each evening, only to find books scattered on the floors or papers removed from filing cabinets overnight. A lot of the clerks that have been here and worked here for years, they've seen a lot of things, said Park Assistant Manager Marty Spells in 2019. They're creeped out. They don't like to be up here after dark, especially by themselves. One such employee is Reba Lawhorn, who was working alongside a part-time high school student at the gift shop when the two made a pact to never work nights alone in the old building. According to workers like Lawhorn, one of the ghosts haunting the site appears to be a 5-year-old little girl, the daughter of a cook at the tavern. During her life, the girl would come home to work with her mother and play on the grounds until one day she fell ill and passed away. After the tavern's conversion into its current state, the little girl continued to haunt the premise, her footsteps echoing up and down the stone stairwell within. Lawson claims that she knows the girl is around whenever she sees objects mysteriously fall from the shelves, or whenever she hears the sound of someone skipping or playing with a ball in another room. On one occasion, the little spirit even untied Lawhorn's shoes. In addition to the little girl, a former park ranger who suddenly passed away on site from a heart attack in the 1950s seems unable to leave his place of employment. Workers say his ghost enjoys hanging out in the basement, where on at least one occasion they captured a spectral face in a photograph taken underneath the gift shop. Most recently, something set off the old tavern's security system right around 11 p.m. one night in autumn of 2019. Assistant Manager Marty Spells and another ranger hopped in their cars and quickly arrived on site, expecting either a burglary or a false alarm. The last thing they ever anticipated was an encounter with the unknown. From the parking lot, Spells and the other ranger saw a light through the upstairs office window, even though all other lights were turned off inside. As per park policy, an intruder seemed almost certain, and the pair of rangers split up so they could see both sides of the building, to make sure no one came in or left. As they did so, they could clearly make out the form of shadow figures, and waited for Harris County PD to arrive and secure the premise. After their arrival, law enforcement thoroughly searched the gift shop inside, upstairs, downstairs, and the basement. They found no one, and after consulting Spells and the other ranger, deemed the area secure and then departed. Spells decided nothing was amiss, leaving behind his fellow ranger, who then decided to linger a bit longer. He just couldn't shake the fact that something had to have triggered the security system. I mean, it doesn't just go off by itself. It wasn't faulty. It was sometime then around midnight when Spells answered his home phone. On the other end of the line was the ranger, in absolute hysterics. "I need to talk to you," he rambled breathlessly. "I'm freaking out right now, and I just need to talk." Spells told him to calm on down to just his residence, just a short drive away on the park property. In short order, the other ranger arrived, and with shaky knees, wandered over to the fence encircling Spells' home. He leaned against it for support, looking white as snow, and explained how, shortly after the area had cleared, he had continued to watch the gift shop from the safety of his car, but to his surprise, the shadows had once again manifested in the windows. Was there some corner of the building the police had missed? Was someone definitely inside? He leaned forward in his seat, trying to get a better view through his windshield, when something in the rearview mirror caught his eye. To his absolute horror, the ranger saw something large bumping across the parking lot behind him. As it came into view in the late fall moonlight, he made it out clear as day. An old stagecoach. He immediately, through the car and drive, sped down the mountain. Spells was shocked by the ranger's story, and he later told a news crew from Columbus's WRBL television station that the witness swore up and down he saw the stagecoach. What made the account even more compelling was that a small two-door building adjacent to the parking lot, which once served as FDR's stagecoach house. Some of the most chilling accounts from Georgia park rangers come from the far north. It was here, near the Tennessee border, that Confederate and Union forces clashed in a bloody battle of Chickamauga, the largest Civil War battle fought in all of Georgia. In fact, its 34,000 casualties made it second only to the Battle of Gettysburg in terms of lives lost. After the final shot was fired on September 20th, 1863, the chaotic conflict left the battlefield strewn with corpses. Burying them all was a colossal undertaking which unfolded over the coming weeks. Stories then began spreading among the gravediggers as they sorted through the mass of human remains. Something else was combing the battlefield alongside them. Some witnesses described it as a headless or a giant head, others being completely intact, but brandishing oversized jaws brimming with glistening sharp teeth or fangs, depending on who you asked. It either had light-colored, waist-length hair or was entirely covered in fur. Most agreed that it stood on two legs, appeared vaguely human, and that its most notable feature was a pair of glistening emerald eyes, earning it the name Old Green Eyes. Rumors abound that the creature gorged itself on the fallen soldiers, favoring the area of Snodgrass Hill where the battle had come to a head just weeks before. Exactly what Green Eyes was, or is, as we shall see momentarily, remains up for debate. Some claimed it was the undead head of a soldier decapitated by a cannonball, doomed to scour the battlefield for all eternity in search of his lost body. Others ardently insist Green Eyes actually predated the Battle of Chickamauga, appearing in indigenous myths as a sort of a grave ghoul, feasting on corpses, while many modern cryptozoologists contend the creature was a bigfoot or a green-eyed panther, opportunistically feasting on the dead. According to Jim Ogden, who's chief historian for the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, the entire story was supposedly fabricated by a former park employee in the late 1960s. But Ogden's claim simply doesn't tally with history, however, as strange occurrences, including phantom heads, have been reported around the battlefield since mid to late 19th century. Long before the site was christened a national park, residents of the area continued running into the paranormal, hearing phantom voices, the sounds of battle, and the clatter of hooves when no horses could be seen. 13 short years after the Battle of Chickamauga, Mr. Jim Carlock was returning home from a centennial celebration in nearby Chattanooga when he beheld something floating across the battlefield 10 feet in the air. It appeared to be a gigantic white head. Carlock's traveling companion, a brave or foolish man by the name of Shields, trotted up on horseback and struck the figure, eliciting a sound similar to a crying baby and the reprimand, "Leave me alone." Carlock believed the phantom was that of a dead slave woman. The large white head, a bundle of clothing she was balancing. Returning to Green Eyes, in any case, it's either immortal or produced offspring, because sightings of the creature persist into the modern era. Visitors to the park still report these horrendous eyes glistening from across the battlefield. In the 1970s, two separate tourists crashed their cars around the same spot, both blaming Green Eyes for terrifying them into losing control. 10 years later, Denise Smith, a resident of Fort Oglethorpe, had just left her restaurant shift and was taking a shortcut home through the park when she spotted something peculiar from her 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner. Between the fog and the rain, Smith was forced to slow to a crawl as she navigated the circuitous road across the blood-soaked fields. As she made her way around the curve, she spotted something in the mist, but couldn't make out any details except for two big green eyes peering back at her. As she approached, they winked out of existence, leaving her to reconsider all those years she deemed Green Eyes a myth. After that, she always took the long way home from work. Perhaps the best contemporary sighting comes from retired park ranger Edward Tinney. In a 1981 interview with author Richard Weiner, Tenney recalled how he had set out onto the battlefield early one morning in 1976 to check on the welfare of some reenactors camping in the park. It was coming up on 4 a.m., and this would be the Rangers' final visit before sunrise. As Tenney slowly made his way towards the reenactors' camp, he noted a distinct chill in the air. The temperature can drop significantly overnight in the North Georgia mountains, even during the height of summer, but something about this morning just seemed different. Unnatural, even. Although he was eager to complete his task and return indoors, his ranger's sense of duty pressed him forward, and soon he found himself skirting Glen Kelly Road. A figure had caught his eye, coming towards him from the opposite direction. A sleepless reenactor wandering the battlefield, perhaps? As it drew near, Tenney's hair stood on end. Yes, it was shaped like a man, but this was not a reactor. The figure towered more than 6 feet tall and seemed outfitted in a long, dark duster or cape, which tussled in the wind despite the calm night. From beneath his coat, Tenney could make out long, stringy black hair swaying to and from the apparition's waistline, imparting an almost feminine aspect. But the thing that chilled Tenney the most was its face. Long, pointed fangs jutted out where the mouth should have been, and its eyes almost glowed almost a greenish orange, in Tenney's words, and they flashed like some sort of wild animal. Immediately, he received an impression that not only had he stumbled upon Old Green Eyes, but that he was in immediate mortal danger. The best the ranger could do was retreat to the other side of the road, and as the specter passed him on the opposite side, he turned and backpedaled away, afraid to take his eyes off it. Green Eyes did the same, until a car rounded the bend. As its headlights fell upon the creature, it seemed to just vanish into thin air. "I've seen Green Eyes," Tenney told his interviewer 6 years later. "You know he's watching. We all know he's watching us. It's enough to make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And I'm not a superstitious man." In a 2003 interview about his Green Eyes encounter, Tenney presciently noted how, wherever there has been great suffering, people are always seeing strange things. It seems as good an answer as any for why Georgia sees its fair share of high strangeness. The state has a long and painful history to reconcile regarding racism and the lasting effects of segregation. This in turn is something of a ghost in its own right, the legacy of hundreds of years of slavery. Georgia's sons and daughters endured some of the bloodiest fighting of the American Civil War. Atlanta was famously burned during the conflict. Looking earlier, it was here in the high Appalachian Mountains of North Georgia where the tragedy of the Trail of Tears began, forcibly evicting 60,000 indigenous Cherokee people from their ancestral homeland over the course of 2 decades, leading to the incalculable death and suffering on their slow exodus west. Prior to that, Georgia was established by the English as a buffer colony. Its sole existence was literally to serve as a defense against Spanish occupation to the south in Florida. Its first colonial settlements were never intended as peaceful towns where citizens could grow and work and play, but rather as a military fortress, keeping 2 global empires at bay. Perhaps more than anywhere else in the Deep South, Georgia is a state defined by conflict. Today, its state and national parks, as well as those employed there, keep these memories alive, faithful stewards of a history that we should never forget, lest we repeat it. The ghosts of its past have never left the Peach State, both literally and figuratively. If you guys thought this video was interesting and enjoyed it, be sure to leave a comment below. Let me know which part was your favorite and what do you think, and be sure to go ahead and hit that like button. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and subscribe and keep your notifications on so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video. As always, guys, I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.